Thanks, Sheree. Can everyone see that screen okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. Alrighty. Well, thank you for having me and letting me kick off this last session of the day. I hope you've all had some caffeine to get you through this last little run. My name's Ellie Cutmore and I'm presenting today on behalf of my fellow teammates Tracey and Danielle Lagadec. And as you can see on the slide, we're all here from the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Social Sciences here at CQUniversity. So today I'm going to be talking to you about simulation-based assessment in the student's home, and is this the new way forward? Here we go. So before I delve too deeply into this topic, I need to set the scene and give you a little bit of background. So in term one this year, 2020, the three of us were co-coordinating a subject here at the university called Clinical Nursing Practice 2, which we commonly call CNP2. CNP2 is a second year clinical practice subject within the Bachelor of Nursing course, and in this subject, students are required to attend 24 hours of compulsory on-campus learning, and this includes simulation-based assessment. The majority of these students attend this in the form of a 3-day residential school, which they come in, they travel a long way, some of them, to attend this, and the remainder, who generally are close to campus, attend this in the mode of 4 consecutive 6-hour internal classes. Attending this on-campus learning and passing the simulation-based assessment that falls within it are both prerequisite requirements for the student to proceed to their work integrated learning. And in this context, we often call that clinical placement. And the reason for this is we must ensure that these students are safe. So in term 1 this year, we had 407 students enrolled in CNP2. And of this 407, 112 were unable to attend these compulsory on-campus learning sessions. And you can see that was a little over the 25% mark. There are a number of reasons for this, the usual illness and some personal reasons arising. And then, of course, we had our COVID-19 implications with border closures that went on to become travel restrictions and ultimately the temporary closure of face-to-face learning here on campus. So all of these classes were running in the latter part of March and into early April this year. So those things were actively occurring right through those 2 or 3 weeks. So obviously this caused us something of a problem. And this really did snowball. So it started off with us having about a quarter of our cohort who were unable to meet their prerequisite requirements so that they were be eligible to proceed to their work integrated learning. This flowed on to mean that they were then unable to progress further through their course. CNP2 was a prerequisite subject for later clinical practice. This caused an issue of delaying their graduation by at least a year. Possibly more, depending on the student's study plan and their mode. And it also presented broader implications for the workforce. And because these students were nursing students, and we are living in a pandemic right now, we have had a big focus on ensuring that we are continuing to produce nursing graduates so that we've got reinforcements for that workforce, because we don't know what's going to happen to our current nursing workforce. So you can see we had a little bit to think about there, and we had to think hard to come up with a solution. Our simulation-based assessment is traditionally conducted on campus in clinical lab spaces, but of course without this option we were forced to consider alternative forms of how to conduct this simulation-based assessment. And this led us to think, and we found our way to video self-recordings. The benefits of using these for reflective practice is well documented in the literature, and not just in nursing, but across quite a few disciplines. And that's all occurred in the last 10 to 15 years, but there's not a lot out there about using this for simulation-based assessment. So in making this happen, we had to make sure that we considered some key important aspects in planning this assessment. And those priorities were to make sure that we could meet our learning objectives, that we could ensure we were providing an authentic learning experience, which is what we knew we were providing when this occurred on campus, and also equally importantly, that this would be achievable. And not just achievable for us, but achievable for our students to be able to do this at home without us there to guide them if they hit any roadblocks along the way. So our approach, we had a few key important things that we did which really helped us succeed with putting this in place. First of all, we had to make sure we provided students with the tools that they needed, and we did that by giving them resource packs. And you can see a little picture there, which is an example of what was in these. So these resource packs contained resources akin to what they would be using if they were in the clinical lab space here on campus. These packs were put together and they were either mailed to students or they were made available for them to pick up from a local campus if this was accessible for them. Of course, some aspects of the simulation space weren't able to be sent in the mail or replicated at home. So we had to find a way for these students to show us, or to show them, I guess, how they could do this assessment without having those things and be successful. So to do that, we had to set the scene, and we had a couple of approaches to this as well. So the first thing we did was we put together an exemplar video for these students, and the purpose of this was to share our vision so they understood what it was that we wanted them to do. So our exemplar was of a scenario that was a bit similar. It helped them see how they could demonstrate certain aspects of their practice without every tool at hand. It also helped give them some practical tips for these videos, like how to film it, how to follow around the student nurse in the video, how to make sure that on the camera they were picking up the important aspects that we'd be wanting to assess. And those are the things that, if this was occurring on campus, we'd be moving around to make sure that we had vision of. This was really key to alleviating anxiety and just sharing that vision of what it is that we could see that this could do. The last thing that was a bit incidental at the time, but on reflection was so important, was asking them to wear their uniforms. So when the students come into us on campus, that's a requirement. They have to wear their student nurse uniform. And we ask them to do this in their videos at home. And this really helped them to immerse themselves in the role and to immerse themselves in the simulation. So the students had all the tools that they needed. They went off, they did their preparation, they filmed their videos and they submitted them. And this is what we needed them to do to tick this box and get them over the line. But the pleasant surprise, I suppose, was that the results were fantastic. And we had a number of key findings that I'm going to share with you. So first of all, our students were able to practice, and practice they did, which was very evident in the videos that they submitted. This ability to practice helped decrease their anxiety significantly. It obviously improved their student performance. And the flip side of this is that if they had they been on campus, they wouldn't normally have a great deal of time to do that. So this was a silver lining of doing this way. These videos also encourage students to reflect more strongly on their practice, and simply put, if they shot their video and they weren't happy with it, they didn't submit it. They stopped, they went back, they reviewed it, they reflected on what didn't feel right, what they needed to do, and they did it again. And they kept incorporating that into their practice until they were happy with the product that they were giving us. We had definite marking benefits. We anecdotally noted a higher pass rate on first attempts, likely due to those first 2 dot points there that they could practice and reflect. On campus, we'd normally have one assessor observing 2 simulations occurring simultaneously. When we were marking these videos, it was 1-to-1. So you had one assessor, uninterrupted, no interference of stuff happening around you, and full view of what was happening on your screen in front of you. And being in video mode, we had the obvious benefit of being able to speed it up, slow it down, pause it, rewind it, to make sure that we were seeing every aspect of that practice as well. That video also allowed us the opportunity for moderation, which again, when this is occurring live, we don't normally have. We didn't need a lot of moderation because we were able to pause, stop, rewind. But if we did, someone else could watch and make an independent judgment of that video, and we could go from there. That, of course, also really helped this next point, which is that we found we had no dispute of grades. As markers, we all found we had greater opportunity to provide feedback on campus. This usually occurs immediately after the simulation. For the student, they're still processing what's happened. They're adrenaline starting to slow down. They've all been quite panicked and stressed. And as the assessor, we're quite conscious that I need to give them this feedback, fill out the assessment form, get them out, reset the simulation space and get the next student in. So there's a lot of time pressures in there. For these students at home though, we were able to do this a bit differently. So we could arrange a time that was mutually agreeable for the student and for ourselves. We could meet them via phone or over Zoom, and we could set something we wanted them to review before that meeting. So for example, we could say, could you watch your video back before we meet? And I just want you to focus on watching your communication in your video. So what this meant was that when students came to this meeting, some of them had had the light bulb moment, and they came already with awareness of what it was that wasn't quite where it needed to be in their practice, and showed that great insight and self-corrected. And other students came armed with questions, or it just became quite evident to us which students really still didn't understand. So we could give them that support and decide whether they needed to have another attempt at this assessment to demonstrate their competency and their safety. Overall, this led to markedly decreased performance anxiety, and we got a lot of anecdotal feedback from our students about this, and some formal feedback in the form of our end of term surveys. So these video self-recordings, initially we adopted them as a temporary measure, as a stopgap, to ensure that our students could keep progressing through their studies amidst this ongoing pandemic. But what did result as a silver lining was actually a really high standard of performance from these students. So I guess that leads us to wonder what's going to happen next. And I think this has been a common theme today, and it was certainly a common theme earlier this morning in some of our opening discussions, that teaching and assessment for us as educators is not going to be the same in a post-COVID-19 world, and we're not quite sure what it's going to look like, but we're already getting a bit of insight into that. So when our students are able to return to campus, what we need to consider from our perspective is whether these self-video recordings have a place in our future teaching, whether we can use them to help us reduce the pressure on our classroom hours by removing that assessment and being able to use those precious face-to-face moments more wisely and more constructively, whether we're actually going to get better performance from our students by performing their assessment via this modality, and ultimately whether that's going to help us produce higher quality graduates from our courses. So just a final note from me before I hand over to Cherie, but our circumstances continue to prevail, I suppose, and moving into term 3 over this summer, we're still unable to bring our students in on campus. So we're again going to be using these self-video recordings to conduct simulation-based assessments in the next subject, which is called Clinical Nursing Practice 3. CNP3 kicks off in 2 or 3 weeks, and we currently have 790 students enrolled in this subject. So this is going to be a much greater undertaking than from what I've presented to you today. So if this interests you, if you'd like to know more or if you'd like to see more, please do contact me after today. We'd be really happy to share and show you what it is that we've been doing and talk further about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Any questions for Ellie? There's a couple in the chat that's been going on. Yes, these sessions are being recorded, so we'll be able to, once the recordings are all processed, we'll let everybody know who's registered on Eventbrite where to find the recordings. So give us a couple of months at least to feed through all of this stuff, because there's lots of recordings, but you will be notified when it's available. Yep, so Alex done that for me. So there's a question there from Fran. Did you have any students who did not access a recording tool?
Most of them used a phone. So they were actually able to do this on a simple iPhone. I think a couple used an iPad. Laptops weren't really feasible because they did need to move around their space a little bit, but the phones were completely successful. We did find that that there are limitations with extracting those videos from phones, and that 15 minutes was the magic number. So students needed their video to be 15 minutes or less, but because they were recording them, or some of them even edited if there was just something happened in the middle and it was this dead space, that wasn't an issue. We were able to get them all in well under that time frame.
And Adrian asks, how many people required for the video recording? Any students able not to enlist helpers? Yep. And any issues?
Yes, that was really interesting because some of these students were doing this depending on where they lived in the peak of some lockdown happening. So we did have a handful of students who had nobody to help them, and they used their own self-fashioned mannequins as their patients at home in their videos, and that meant for them that they had to set their camera up in a fixed point and make sure that whatever they did was in clear vision of that. Most people were completely fine. We had students who it was clear that they were living in a share house and their flatmates were helping them. We had a lot of parents and loved ones. We had a lot of very serious assistants. But we also didn't see their faces. We did ensure that the students made sure that no one else's face was featured on camera. So but you heard a lot of voices.
Okay, and Shirley says, great presentation. Was it more time intensive to mark?
No, it really wasn't. When we go through these live, we usually have 20 minutes for each scenario for students because in the lab they are processing a little bit. At home they could be prepared before they press record. And then after that we have to quickly complete their assessment template, give that feedback, reset and get the space ready. So when we watch these at home and we were marking them, most of us were working from home, we usually had 15 minutes and then it was fill out the marking template and off you go. And with working off 2 screens, sometimes you're able to have a little bit of that happening. So I actually feel it certainly wasn't any longer. For some students it may have been a little bit less.
Yep. And Karina's got one last question. How confident are you in the transferability of the skills?
Quite confident actually. And we were just so blown away and impressed by what our students produced. And that's what really made us stop and pay attention and think, wow, this might actually have legs. There might be a future to using this. It will obviously depend on what it is that you're doing. We definitely weren't skills focused. There were some components in there where students had to demonstrate something safely and accurately. For an example, giving a medication, there's a distinct process. But a lot of it was bigger picture. So it was, safe documentation, safe communication, forming relationships, and etc. And it certainly didn't feel that there was any decrease or loss of authenticity in that learning experience for them.